What is the most dangerous predator? Is it the one who lies and cheats openly? Or is it the one who uses your own values against you? Today's story takes us to medieval London, the beating heart of English commerce. We will witness how a young wool merchant discovered that honesty and generosity could become the deadliest weapons of all, when used with calculated precision. With a lesson he learned from studying failed manipulators, he would develop a strategy to make victims grateful for their own exploitation. This story will reveal the most sinister secret of manipulation, a secret discovered 600 years ago, but still used by the most sophisticated predators in today's world. It is not those who obviously deceive who cause the greatest harm, but those who weaponize the very virtues we trust most, turning our desire for honesty and generosity into the tools of our own destruction. In the bustling commercial heart of medieval London, where the Thames carried both fortune and ambition through the city's veins and every guild hall echoed with the sounds of prosperity and competition, there lived a truth more dangerous than any blade. In a world where everyone expects deception and guards against obvious manipulation, the one who weaponizes generosity and selective honesty becomes the most formidable predator of all. For when merchants and nobles, craftsmen and clergy all build their defenses against lies and greed, they leave themselves completely vulnerable to attacks disguised as kindness and truth. The year was 1378, and London had emerged as one of Europe's most dynamic commercial centers, a city where fortunes could be made through wit and ambition, but where competition was fierce and trust was a luxury few could afford. Within this labyrinth of opportunity and peril, a young wool merchant named Thomas Ashford faced a challenge that would test not only his commercial acumen, but his understanding of the darkest applications of human psychology. At 32, Thomas possessed the technical knowledge that marked him as competent in the complex world of English wool trade. He understood market dynamics, had developed relationships with reliable suppliers in the countryside, and possessed the kind of analytical mind that could spot profitable opportunities in the seasonal fluctuations of supply and demand. But he had also discovered something that his more ethical competitors seemed to have overlooked. People's natural defenses against deception could be completely bypassed through the strategic application of apparent honesty and calculated generosity. The insight had come to him during a particularly frustrating period when his legitimate business practices were yielding only modest profits, while less scrupulous competitors seemed to thrive through various forms of manipulation and fraud. Thomas began to study these successful rivals, trying to understand how they achieved their results. And what he discovered was that their methods shared a fatal flaw. They were too obviously predatory, which made their targets naturally suspicious and defensive. Thomas realized that the most effective approach would be to do exactly the opposite of what people expected from a manipulative merchant. Instead of hiding his true intentions behind layers of deception, he would be selectively honest about some aspects of his business, while using that honesty as a weapon to blind his targets to the areas where he was actually exploiting them. Instead of being obviously greedy, he would demonstrate genuine generosity in certain situations, while using that generosity to create psychological debt and emotional manipulation that yielded far greater returns than simple avarice ever could. The strategy began to take shape when Thomas encountered Sir William de Courcy, a wealthy landowner whose extensive sheep farming operations made him one of the most important wool suppliers in the region. Sir William had a reputation for being extremely cautious in his business dealings, having been cheated by several merchants in the past who had used various forms of fraud and manipulation to secure favorable terms at his expense. Traditional merchants approached Sir William with elaborate presentations about their reliability and fair dealing, but their obvious desperation to secure his business made him suspicious of their motives. Thomas took a completely different approach. He began their first meeting by freely admitting several disadvantages of working with his company, openly discussing his limited storage capacity, and acknowledging that his smaller operation meant he couldn't always match the volume commitments that larger merchants could offer. This unexpected honesty immediately caught Sir William's attention. Here was a merchant who seemed to be talking himself out of a profitable deal rather than overselling his capabilities. The transparency was so unusual in Thomas's industry that it created an immediate sense of trust and authenticity that Sir William had rarely encountered in previous business relationships. But Thomas's honesty was carefully calculated to serve a deeper purpose. By voluntarily revealing minor disadvantages that Sir William would have discovered anyway, Thomas created the impression that he was completely transparent and trustworthy. This selective honesty then provided perfect cover for the areas where Thomas was actually planning to exploit the relationship through methods that Sir William would never suspect. When Sir William expressed concerns about payment schedules and the risk of non-payment that had plagued some of his previous merchant relationships, Thomas responded with what appeared to be extraordinary generosity. He offered to pay 50% of each shipment's value up front, with the remainder paid within 30 days of delivery. Terms that were far more favorable to Sir William than anything he had been offered before. Sir William was impressed not just by the favorable terms, but by Thomas's apparent confidence in his own ability to resell the wool quickly enough to manage the cash flow challenges that such an arrangement would create. The generosity seemed to demonstrate both financial strength and genuine partnership thinking, rather than the purely extractive approach that Sir William had experienced with other merchants. What Sir William didn't understand was that Thomas had structured the deal to create a psychological trap that would ultimately give him far more control over the relationship than any conventional arrangement could have achieved. The generous upfront payments and the transparency about minor business limitations had been designed to accomplish something much more valuable than immediate profit. They created a sense of obligation and emotional dependency that Thomas could leverage for much larger gains over time. The trap began to close during their third transaction, when Thomas approached Sir William with what appeared to be a significant business opportunity. Thomas had, he explained, been approached by Flemish textile manufacturers who were willing to pay premium prices for high-quality English wool. But they required larger volumes than Thomas could normally supply and demanded specific quality standards that required careful coordination with suppliers. Thomas presented this opportunity not as a way to increase his own profits, but as a chance to help Sir William earn significantly more for his wool than he could through normal market channels. The Flemish connection, Thomas explained, could potentially double Sir William's income from his sheep farming operations. But it would require a more exclusive partnership arrangement that would give Thomas first option on Sir William's entire wool production. The proposal seemed almost too generous to be true. Thomas was offering to share what appeared to be an extraordinarily profitable opportunity, while asking for nothing more than exclusivity arrangements that would actually benefit Sir William by guaranteeing him a reliable buyer for his entire production. Sir William's previous experiences with Thomas's honesty and generosity made him inclined to trust this new proposal, especially since Thomas continued to acknowledge potential disadvantages and risks rather than overselling the opportunity. But what Thomas had actually created was a sophisticated dependency trap. The Flemish opportunity was real, but Thomas had carefully omitted several crucial details about how the arrangement actually worked. The premium prices that the Flemish manufacturers were willing to pay came with quality standards so specific and demanding that they effectively gave Thomas complete control over whether Sir William's wool would qualify for the lucrative contracts. Over the following months, Thomas used his position as the exclusive buyer and quality arbiter to gradually restructure the relationship in ways that served his interests, while maintaining the appearance of partnership and mutual benefit. When shipments of Sir William's wool failed to meet the allegedly strict Flemish quality standards, Thomas would express genuine regret and offer to purchase the rejected wool at standard market prices, presenting himself as a reliable safety net rather than the manipulator who had actually engineered the rejection. The beauty of the system was that Thomas's previous demonstrations of honesty and generosity made it psychologically impossible for Sir William to suspect that he was being systematically exploited. Every setback was presented as an unfortunate market reality rather than a deliberate manipulation. And Thomas's willingness to purchase rejected wool at fair prices seemed to demonstrate continued partnership thinking rather than opportunistic exploitation. More insidiously, Thomas began to use his knowledge of Sir William's increasing financial dependency on the Flemish contracts to extract additional concessions that served his broader business strategy. When Thomas needed short-term loans to finance other operations, he approached Sir William not as a creditor, but as a partner who might benefit from opportunities to invest in expanding their shared Flemish business. Sir William, grateful for the profitable opportunities that Thomas had created and trusting in his partner's demonstrated honesty and generosity, readily agreed to these additional financial arrangements. What he didn't realize was that Thomas was using his loans to finance competitive operations that would ultimately undermine Sir William's position in the broader wool market. The full scope of Thomas's strategy became apparent during the spring of 1380, when political tensions between England and Flanders temporarily disrupted the textile trade that had been so profitable for Sir William. Thomas approached his partner with what appeared to be devastating news. The Flemish contracts would have to be suspended indefinitely, and Sir William would need to find alternative buyers for his wool production. But Thomas, ever the generous partner, had a solution. He explained, been developing relationships with domestic textile manufacturers who could potentially absorb Sir William's production, though at significantly lower prices than the Flemish market had provided. Thomas offered to facilitate these new arrangements and to provide short-term financial support to help Sir William weather the transition period. What Sir William didn't understand was that Thomas had orchestrated the entire crisis. The political tensions that had disrupted the Flemish trade were real, but Thomas had been preparing for this possibility for months and had used Sir William's loans to establish exactly the kind of domestic textile relationships that he was now offering as a rescue solution. The disruption that appeared to threaten both partners actually strengthened Thomas's position by making Sir William completely dependent on arrangements that Thomas controlled entirely. The domestic manufacturers that Thomas brought to the partnership were, in fact, closely connected to his own expanding operations. They purchased Sir William's wool at prices that Thomas set, processed it through facilities that Thomas had financial interests in, and sold the finished products through distribution networks that Thomas had helped establish using capital that Sir William had unknowingly provided. By the end of 1380, Thomas had achieved something that would have been impossible through conventional business practices. He had gained effective control over one of the region's most productive wool operations while maintaining the appearance of being a generous and honest partner who had helped Sir William navigate challenging market conditions. Sir William continued to own his land and sheep, but every aspect of his business operation was now structured around arrangements that Thomas controlled and that served Thomas's broader commercial strategy. The psychological dimension of Thomas's success was as important as the financial results. Sir William genuinely believed that Thomas had saved his business during a period of market crisis, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude and loyalty that made him eager to support additional opportunities that Thomas presented. The emotional manipulation had been so subtle and so thoroughly disguised as genuine partnership that Sir William never suspected he had been systematically exploited. Thomas's reputation in London's commercial community reflected this same dynamic. He was known as an unusually honest and generous merchant who had helped several partners achieve remarkable success during difficult market conditions. Other merchants studied his methods, trying to understand how he had built such strong relationships and achieved such impressive results. But they consistently misunderstood the sophistication of his approach. What appeared to be straightforward business success built on trust and partnership was actually the result of weaponized psychology that used people's natural desire for honesty and generosity as a delivery mechanism for exploitation and control. Thomas had discovered that the most effective predators are those who appear to be the most generous benefactors. The ultimate validation of Thomas's approach came when he began to apply the same methods to other relationships throughout London's commercial and social networks. He identified influential figures who had been disappointed by previous experiences with deceptive or obviously manipulative partners, then approached them with the same combination of selective honesty and calculated generosity that had proven so effective with Sir William. Each new relationship followed a similar pattern. Thomas would begin by freely acknowledging minor disadvantages or limitations that created an impression of unusual transparency, then demonstrate generosity through arrangements that appeared to benefit his partners more than himself, and finally use the trust and emotional dependency created by these initial interactions to gradually restructure relationships in ways that served his expanding commercial empire. The network effects of this approach were extraordinary. Partners who believed they had benefited from Thomas's honesty and generosity became enthusiastic advocates who recommended him to their own business associates and social connections. Each successful manipulation created multiple new opportunities for additional manipulations, and Thomas's reputation for integrity and partnership thinking opened doors that would have remained closed to merchants who used more obviously predatory methods. But perhaps most remarkably, Thomas's victims often remained grateful and loyal, even after they had been thoroughly exploited. The psychological foundations of his approach were so sophisticated that people who had lost significant wealth and independence through their relationships with Thomas continued to view him as a trusted partner who had helped them navigate challenging circumstances rather than as the architect of their difficulties. Years later, when Thomas had become one of London's most influential merchants and his methods had created a commercial network that extended throughout England and into continental Europe, he would reflect on the counterintuitive principles that had guided his success. The key insight he had learned was that people's defenses against deception and exploitation were designed to protect them against obvious threats. But those same defenses could be completely bypassed through approaches that appeared to embody the virtues that people valued most highly. Honesty, Thomas would tell himself in his private moments of reflection, is the most powerful weapon in the world when it's used selectively and strategically. People expect lies from those who want to exploit them, so they build elaborate defenses against deception. But they have no defenses against someone who tells them carefully chosen truths while hiding exploitation behind generosity and partnership. The approach had proven so effective that it influenced English commercial culture for generations. Thomas's apparent success through honest dealing and generous partnership arrangements inspired other merchants to adopt similar approaches, though few understood the psychological sophistication that made his methods actually work. The tradition of honest merchant practices that emerged from his example created a business culture that was simultaneously more ethical in its surface appearances and more systematically exploitative in its deeper structures. The irony was profound. Thomas's weaponization of honesty and generosity had created a commercial environment where people felt safer and more trusting, which made them even more vulnerable to sophisticated psychological manipulation by those who understood the true nature of his success. In our modern world of complex financial instruments and sophisticated marketing psychology, this medieval wisdom has never been more relevant or more dangerous. We live in an age where consumers and investors have developed elaborate defenses against obvious scams and transparent manipulation. But those same defenses often leave them completely vulnerable to approaches that weaponize the virtues they value most highly. The most successful con artists and financial predators of our time are those who have learned to apply the same principles that guided Thomas over 6 centuries ago. They understand that the most effective way to exploit people is not through obvious deception, but through selective honesty that creates trust, and through calculated generosity that creates emotional dependency and psychological debt. This doesn't mean that all generosity is manipulative or that honesty is always weaponized, but rather that we must develop more sophisticated understanding of how these virtues can be exploited by those who understand their psychological power. The most dangerous predators are often those who appear to be the most generous benefactors, and the most effective lies are often embedded within carefully chosen truths. Whether you're evaluating investment opportunities, considering business partnerships, or simply navigating personal relationships, the principles of defensive psychology remain as important today as they were in medieval London. Be especially cautious of those who seem too honest about minor flaws while being evasive about major issues. Be suspicious of generosity that seems designed to create emotional debt rather than genuine benefit. And remember that the most sophisticated manipulation often comes disguised as the very virtues you value most highly. For in the guild halls of medieval London, Thomas Ashford learned that the greatest predators are not those who obviously violate social norms, but those who appear to embody them perfectly while using that appearance as cover for systematic exploitation. And in that understanding lies a timeless warning. When someone seems too good to be true, they usually are. But the danger may come not from obvious deception, but from weaponized virtue that turns your own values against you. The most important defense against such sophisticated psychological manipulation is not cynicism or distrust of all generosity, but rather the development of more nuanced understanding of how virtues can be weaponized, and the cultivation of relationships based on genuine mutual benefit rather than emotional dependency and manufactured gratitude.